Prime Minister of independent Sri Lanka. Dear Sri said, agriculture is not merely a way of making money by raising crops. It is not merely an industry or a business. It is essentially a public function or service performed by private individuals for the care and use of the land in the national interest, and farmers in the course of securing a living and a private profit are the custodians of the basis of the national life. Since 1948, we have come far. We've walked many miles. Where is the country standing today? 69 years of independence. On Saturday was a significant day for Sri Lankans. We saw the Independence Day celebrations being held with much pomp and pageantry. However, are we on the right track in terms of economic growth? What steps are we taking on a new constitution? Do we have law and order? And do we have a foreign policy? How far have we gone on sustainable development goals as well as global environmental goals? Judicial process, do we have one? And then comes corruption, nepotism. Where are we really heading? Post-independent Sri Lanka. What is happening to our motherland? 10 years from now, what will happen? We are not in any way trying to predict the future. We are giving a forecast of what will happen next. What must we do? How do we tighten our belts? How do we look at Sri Lanka in the next few months if we are to see a bright future in 10 years? This evening, my guests are those who are very eminent personalities. They have a lot of knowledge in the areas of economic, they have knowledge on foreign policy, and they have knowledge on the global environmental impacts as well as goals. Let me introduce them to you this evening. Joining us this evening is no stranger to the show, Professor Rohan Samarjiva, founding chair, Learn Asia. Nice to have you on board as well, Professor, as usual. Also joining us this evening is Dr. Pratibha Mahanamaheva, former Commissioner, Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission, as well as attorney at law. Also joining us this evening on the show is Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Nice to have you on board, Dr. Vijayawardena, as usual. Also joining us this evening for the first time on the show is Professor W. Y. Sirivira, Emeritus Professor of History, University of Peradeniya. Nice to have you on the show. So let's start off tonight's show with Professor W. Y. Sirivira from the University of Peradeniya. Professor, 1948, we just gained independence. Sri Lanka was looking at agriculture as a main source of income. However, since then, many things have changed. Open economy came into being. Now we're looking at things differently. Foreign policy has changed since 1948. What is happening to Sri Lanka in terms of foreign policy and growth? Is this what our leaders envisaged as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, 69 years after independence? The time starts now.
Yeah, initially you mentioned about agriculture, but in the field of agriculture also there had been strides. In fact, until 1970s, we have had a serious shortage of rice. We had to import rice. Rice was a criterion which changed the governments as well until 1977. But due to efforts of, we have to be fair, due to efforts of successive governments, at least in rice production we are self-sufficient. There may be other deficiencies, but in the field of rice production, with increased population, we have become self-sufficient. As far as foreign policy is concerned, again, foreign policy has been decided by the executive heads, not by parliament. And as a result, from 1948 until 2015, the foreign policies have varied from time to time depending on the nature of the regime. For instance, the UMP regimes after post-independence honeymoon, 48 to 56, veered towards the West. They had an antipathy towards communist regimes. The importation of literature from socialist countries were even banned by Sir John Kotalawala in 1954-55. But subsequently, with the change of the regime in 56, again there was a shift. The vistas of foreign policy were opened up. Relations with foreign socialist countries were established. So from 56 to 77, if we exclude Mr. Dudley Senanayaka's regime from 65 to 70, we notice one trend: establishment of diplomatic relations with countries other than the Western countries, widening the horizons of foreign policy. But then again, as I mentioned, 77, when the United National Party regime comes in, again there was a strong bias towards the West. Subsequently, of course, since 1994, when Madam Chandrika Kumartunga became the president, the global situation has changed. The Soviet system has collapsed. So as a result, the foreign policy, there was a balance. In fact, President Chandrika Kumartunga brought in a balance in the foreign policy which was lacking in the previous times. But now, subsequently, 2005 we see there was a strong pro-China base. In fact, 2005 to 2015, the whole eggs were put in the Chinese basket, which was not correct.
Professor, Sri Lanka, let's talk about the non-aligned movement. Yes. Sri Lanka was a strong member of the non-aligned movement, which was found in the year 1961. However, it was Jawaharlal Nehru who spoke of the non-aligned movement, who spoke of the 5 pillars that governs the non-aligned movement in 1954 in Colombo. He spoke about the 5 pillars. He said that mutual respect is important, mutual non-aggression is important, and he spoke of another 3 aspects as well. Now, Sri Lanka was a strong member of the non-aligned movement. However, now things are sliding back. Why?
Well, Sri Lanka was a strong member of the non-aligned movement, and particularly from Mrs. Bandaranaike's time. In fact, she initiated she was one of the members in the non-aligned movement. But what happened was the importance of non-aligned movement until 1977, late 1970s was there. So as a result, we as a member of non-aligned movement, in fact Mrs. Bandaranaike brought in the idea of making Indian Ocean a zone of peace, which was adopted by the United Nations.
So now the last 10 years, President Mahinda Rajapaksa was getting closer to China and Russia and distancing the West. Now this government has a policy of getting close to everyone, but is that working for us?
In fact, this government also didn't have a proper policy immediately after they came. In fact, they stopped the Sport City program, even Hambantota project. They were not very keen. But later, the government realized that the aid that was expected from the West was not coming, and government went into a course correction program.
Thank you very much, President. We'll talk a little bit more about the government not having a proper policy in a bit in our second round, which our journalists will be posing questions to you as well. Professor, let's move our attention now to Dr. W. A. Jayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. I want to quip what Professor Sirivira said. He said that no proper policy. Let's talk about the economic growth in Sri Lanka. Is there consistent policy that we are seeing from this government? Let's talk about 1948. Let's talk about the open economy. Since the open economy came into being, things have changed dramatically, Dr. Vijayawardena. Let's take a look at now, the situation now in Sri Lanka. is there consistent policy in the country, or is there no policy at all? They don't know what they're doing. The time starts now.
Samir, immediately after the election, general elections, the Prime Minister delivered an economic policy statement in Parliament, which was a comprehensive policy package. And if we were able to implement that policy package, we can say we had a consistent policy. But unfortunately, what happened was 2 weeks after the announcement of the policy, there was a budget presented by the Minister of Finance in Parliament, and that budget hadn't taken into account what the Prime Minister had announced in his economic policy statement. Therefore, there was no any mechanism for the government to implement the policy package that had been announced there. So as a result, we had to spend about 12 months without a policy. Then Prime Minister again in October last year delivered another economic policy statement which didn't have any connection to the policy statement which had been delivered 1 year ago. Normally, when you have a policy statement, how you would propose to do is the first part of the new policy statement, you have to analyze the goals of the previous one. You have to highlight the achievements, and you have to highlight the failures, and you have to attribute the reasons for the failures and the measures that you have taken to rectify them. Now, in the second policy statement, these important aspects were missing. So as a result, it was actually a new policy statement, and even after the announcement of this policy statement, we don't find any mechanism introduced by the government to implement them. So what we have today is therefore a policy-less era in which things are happening on their own. The private sector is producing, and as you said, the farmers are producing paddy, vegetables and various other products. Fishermen are going to sea and they are catching fish, and things are happening in the country, but there is no any concrete policy package that is being followed by the government. And as a result, we have lots of problems with respect to our external sector, economic growth, the development of the human capital of the country, and we are facing serious problems in all these areas which are the contributors to future economic growth of the country.
Dr. Vijayavardhana, in the November 2015 policy statement, the Prime Minister says that he envisages to create 1 million jobs. Now, in the same year, according to the government website, it says that the unemployment rate stands at 4.7%, and the unemployed number of persons in Sri Lanka stands at 422,446. Why 1 million jobs if there are only 422,446 individuals who are unemployed in the country?
Yeah, Samir, but this creation of these 1 million jobs was not to be done in a single year. It was to be done over a period of time from year 2015 to year 2020, because we didn't have 1 million people unemployed in 2015 in order to offer jobs to these people. But of course, what I find is that even then there must be a proper policy target of getting all these people who are joining the labour force as new entrants into the labour force and into the market. And there was no any policy except getting them employed in banks and other public sector institutions. So this is where the government has failed, because the private sector job creation has not taken place, because there was no any worthwhile investment that had taken place in the private sector. Because of all these reasons, the creation of 1 million job was just on paper, and there was no any concrete plan to implement it in practice.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Jayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. It's mere words and no action, restricted to only a paper. Let's talk about the amendment to the constitution, bringing forth a new constitution to Sri Lanka. Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheva, former Commissioner of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission, as well as an attorney at law. Since 1978, we've seen 19 amendments to the Constitution. The 20th amendment to the Constitution is to be the electoral system, changes to the electoral system in the country. Now they're talking of a new Constitution. Will we see the light end of this dark tunnel? Will we see a new Constitution in the next few years? At least the next 10 years? Will we see a new constitution, Dr. Mahana Meheva? Or is it just mere words, as Dr. Vijayawardena just concluded?
Shamir, I like to first point out, actually you are starting with independence. Now 1948, we got independence, it's a semi-independence. But really, when we became a republic in 1972, May 22nd, that's the real date we got our independence. Because until that period, from 1948 to 1972, our final, any case, even Supreme Court give a judgment, it can be appealed. It was there in the coup 1964, King versus Lienegi. Now thereafter, 1972 constitution, that also based on Westminster system. So that's why the so-called 1978 constitution with the executive president, which was introduced in parliament. And this 1978 constitution, even today, it is the lively law in Sri Lanka. But one thing I like to express, 2015 January, all presidential candidates, they gave certain election promises. One of the main one is 19th Amendment. But even 19th Amendment, beyond that, there were a lot of pressure from Geneva. Because 2014, I can remember how the pressure came on to this constitution. And thereafter what they decided, to introduce a new constitution, the committees were set up. But unfortunately, whether the people-friendly committees were there, how many people participated for that? Now, the allegation, you must be honestly say, the best constitution I have ever seen, 1996 South African constitution. Now, Shamir, if you want to introduce a constitution, you put a draft. When Nelson Mandela, 2 to 3 years, what happened? They had a sketch and a draft. Now here what we are looking, people are in dark. Because the committees are asking what you want. And only 6 committee reports had been published. The main argument, abolition of executive president. Is it there at the moment? You are talking about a new constitution. Before the new constitution, you please go through these 6 drafts. Whether these 6 drafts, whatever the people aspirations are there. Good governance. The former Secretary General, Kofi Annan said, people participation is necessary. And also the election on the other side. So that's why they are looking for a 20th amendment. That's why different ministers say different things. Some ministers say yes, we need a constitution, others say no. But anyway, if you want to 19th amendment, give me 1 minute. What had happened? Even Supreme Court said you have to go for a referendum. If executive president powers transfer to prime minister. So definitely there must be a referendum. But before the referendum, like Nepal, we must have an interim constitution. But it is not coming up at the moment. There are 6 committee reports all. And what we have to really come up with a draft constitution, then people can say whatever they need. But other than that, if we ad hoc way, you go and collect ideas, it may really not the real perception.
Dr. Mahana, you spoke of the 1996 South African Constitution. Yeah. Several years later, President Chandrika Bandaranaike also tabled a draft constitution which was burnt by members of parliament. So having a draft alone won't do the job, would it?
It came 2 times. Not only 1997 October, 2000 October also. Where the politicians, whether they have the real vision, rather than thinking about the country, they were just destroyed. I know they burned down. Some of the present ministers were in the parliament at that time. What was the main ambition? To abolish executive president and come up with the executive prime minister. So this draft actually didn't even discuss in the parliament. That means there was no collective agreement. You must have a collective agreement, and also what you happen, you have to go and discuss with grassroots level. But it
so you mean to say that the executive prime ministerial position is the way out for Sri Lanka? Yes or no?
My main argument, executive president must be remain. Not only today, certain powers you can curtail, but the country like Sri Lanka, at least for another 10 years, my main argument, executive president must remain.
I'm going to ask you a political question, Dr. Mahana Meheva. You said that the executive presidential system should remain. You had the former president of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, stating that he is going to topple the government this year. If the executive presidential system is to remain, if the constitution is to give effect to the executive president of Sri Lanka, how is the former president going to topple the government, and how is he going to do it practically?
These are all political statements. I don't agree with that. These are all political statements. To build up the political moral and keep their supporters, they will come up with statements like that. So, main thing, even people want to change, no election, it is where parliament head transfer from one side to another side. The main ambition, if executive president remain, whatever you say is a reality. But my argument is not like that. Even you can come up with an impeachment motion against a president. Now, the possibility is there. That's what I'm telling you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheva, for joining us this evening, attorney at law as well as the former commissioner of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission. Professor Rohan Samarjeva, founding chair of Learn Asia. Dr. Mahanameheva said that politicians don't have a real vision. I want to drag your attention to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. Sri Lanka has done well in many respects. I want to focus your attention to eradicating poverty. I want to focus your attention on quality education. The budget 2017 said, in terms of education, that the government is looking at giving tabs for students, O-level students. No talk of it anymore. Are we on the right track, Professor Rohan Samarjeva? Giving tabs alone, would it improve the quality of our education system? Or must there be a complete change in Sri Lanka's education system? I recollect Dr. Sarath Amarugama once, being in the government a few years ago, said, I have a problem with the government. He was a very strong member of the former regime. He said, I have a problem. My problem is Sri Lanka's education system. Now, he is in the government again. Nothing concrete is taking place. Why not we look at Sri Lanka's education system? The time starts now.
Well, you said you're going to focus on poverty as well as education, but the rest of your rhetorical question was entirely on education.
Let's talk about education first.
Sure. So the issue is, the reason why education is not reformed is something called the iron triangle. We have the old boys, we have the teachers, we have the parents, all these people getting together and preventing any kind of reforms from happening. So you can't blame the politicians too much, because whenever the politicians try, like for example Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe trying in the early 90s to do it in the proper way using a white paper, when we talk about all these constitutions and so on, you're talking about giving a preliminary idea of what you're going to do, asking for people to respond, and then changing it into final policy. Now what happened with the white paper? The country was set on fire. So ever since then, nobody actually does white papers in Sri Lanka. That was the last white paper. That was the end of proper governance procedures, was because we tried to do it the right way. I think more and more what you're getting is incremental changes happening. For example, instead of giving school uniforms, the idea that you'd give vouchers that the parents can then go and get the items of clothing that they want. Things like same kind of mechanisms being introduced in the universities. For example, accounts being made so that any student will know, even if the education is free, how much did it cost? Because a medical student costs a lot of money. So the University Grants Commission has gone about and calculated these costs so that at least we have a nominal amount that can then be looked at when people are protesting and so on, and we say, how fair is this? That in addition to getting all this free education worth several million rupees, you are now asking for the prevention of other people getting opportunities. Whereas in the arts faculties and so on, we are spending much less. And one of the most important things is to reorient people from the areas where there are no jobs. And that doesn't have to be done by government. We have a situation where many people who get university admission are not actually accepting admission. We have a situation where the arts faculties are now about 80% women. Now those who like gender equality should, on the face of it, say, oh wow, the universities are now more than 50% women and arts faculties are now 80% women. Is this a good thing, I ask you? Or is it that the men who have more clearer career objectives are leaving the government educational system and they're going to where the money is, going to where the jobs are? And this is going to be treated like some kind of sinecure, some kind of, you know, you take this job and you have an easy life. That kind of attitude. So yeah, incremental changes are being made because that seems to be the only thing we can do in this country.
Let's talk about poverty, your subject area, Professor Rohan Samarjeva. It seems to me that you really want to talk about poverty as well. Professor, the government, led by the president, wants to eradicate poverty. He wants to do something for the people of Sri Lanka. However, my question to you is very simple. Is this all possible, or is this just another daydreaming matter? Because we saw the former regime wanted to make Sri Lanka the miracle of Asia by the year 2016. We are now in the year 2017. Nothing concrete has taken place. Now we are talking about eradicating poverty. When are we going to do this?
Let's go back to independence. One indication of how well people are living is how long they live. Right? At independence, our people lived about 44 years. The men lived slightly longer, maybe a year or two more than women. Now what is the situation? Women live 78 years and men live around 72 years. So you could say that by that aggregate indicator, our people are living better than they lived 69 years ago. Our poverty count, people can debate the calculation, our poverty count has been declining over the last 20-30 years where I have looked at the data. Now, however, we have people who are what we call near poverty, that any shock to the system, a sickness, a drought could throw them back into poverty. So I think these are the issues we need to focus on. We have made progress since independence. I think it's very pessimistic to, and perhaps even counterproductive, to say that we have made no progress. We have made progress, we could have done better, and I think the key is at this point to focus on what we can do better. And I think that's what the President is trying with his focus on eradicating poverty.
Now you co-author a book in the year 2013. You of course know the name of it.
Yes.
However, for the benefit of our viewers, I'm going to mention the name. It says, Information Lives of the Poor.
Information Lives of the Poor, yes.
Information Lives of the Poor. Now, let's talk about the poor in the country. What is happening to them? 6.7% living below the poverty line in Sri Lanka. What steps have the government taken to ensure that this number is reduced further?
Well, the President actually declared 2017 to be the year. So we are still in February, yeah?
10 more months to go. Can they do it?
11 more months to go. We are at the beginning of February.
11 more months to go. Can they do it, Professor?
So the issue is, now let's go back to the election manifestos. The election manifesto had various kinds of insurance schemes for people who lose their lives at sea, for farmers, for people who lose their lives driving three-wheelers, etc. Now, if you really go back and look at it, now unfortunately people don't do this hard work. If you look at it, these things are being implemented. I would say that's a very important step. Now, I do see a serious problem because of the drought. Because, as I said, our real problem area is more people are right on the edge and they can be thrown back into poverty. And I fear that if we don't manage this drought situation carefully, we could have an increase in poverty rather than a decrease.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjeva. For the benefit of our viewers, in the year 2013, Professor Rohan Samarjeva co-authored a book titled Information Lives of the Poor. It was published in English, French, Spanish, as well as Burmese. Am I right?
Yes.
Very good. Spot on this time. Okay, let me introduce journalists this evening. On to my right is Chaturanga Haporachi. On to my left is Sonali Vanagavadyo, also an attorney at law. Joining us this evening is also Charita Fernando, a journalist attached to Newsfirst, as well as Assistant Manager of Business at Newsfirst. So let's start off tonight's show with our journalist. Let's start off with Charita.
Thank you, Shab. My first question is for you, Professor Samarjiva. Now, we often talk about threats, external threats that disturb our freedom. What are internal threats, that challenge our freedom right now?
You mean us as people, yeah?
Yes.
I think the inability to actually understand the world as it is and to try to go back and try to bring solutions or thinking from the past that are completely inappropriate for today. Like, for example, unnecessary and unnecessarily strong fixation on things like agriculture, when the country's economy, there's only 10% of the economy is now agriculture, and around 30% of our people are working in agriculture. But we hear in so many public fora this idea that Sri Lanka is an agricultural country, we have to think about agriculture, we have to give preeminence to agriculture, etc. When if you really do surveys and if you find out what the young people are thinking, I actually did some surveys in Mahavilachya several years ago, which is a completely agricultural area where people were settled for agricultural purposes. So we had a control group and we had another group where they had been given computers. But none of these groups, the most interesting thing was there were other differences, but in none of these groups, none of the secondary school children said that they wanted to go into agriculture. They wanted to go to the army, they wanted to go into IT, they wanted to become nurses, they wanted to become teachers. You see the pattern. They wanted to go into the service industry. They didn't want to go into agriculture. But we still keep talking about these outdated conceptions. So that, I think, is the greatest threat that we have. This is possibly why we have not been able to make the changes that we need to do as a small island nation that is open to the world, and we have not succeeded in making the necessary changes.
But Professor, do you think we have enough time to make the transition? Do they have the required skills to move from agriculture to the service sector?
But they have been moving. I mean, if I look at the numbers in Pakistan, if I look at the numbers in India, we have less people working in agriculture than in those countries. The issue is, are we creating attractive jobs for them? And it is because we are not creating attractive jobs for them that they are lining up to take exams to go to Korea, that they are going to the Middle East, that they are going and pestering every politician they know to get them jobs in government. That's why they are sitting outside government offices asking for permanent positions. So that is our problem. So do we have enough time? I am an optimist. I think there's always time. But if you are pessimistic, you can say we have missed the bus.
Just one more question, Professor. Now, we know the main two political parties, the UNP and the SLFP, they've been running Sri Lanka, governing Sri Lanka since independence. So why haven't we seen proper policies? What we see, soon after government change is a new set of policies. There's no continuity. There's no national policy for agriculture or for anything for that matter. Why is that?
Well, we have always paid lip service to having consistency of policy. But if you really think about it, the idea of the open market economy, the end of Halpolu and Mirispolu, where people were proscribed from moving some chilies from one place to another, where people were told how many people they can have at their wedding, where people were told what to eat and what to wear. I've lived through this, right? They used to tell us what we could eat at the ration shop, right? That policy was buried in 1978, and despite changes in governments, there has been consistency that we are not going back to that kind of extraordinarily controlled economy. Consistency. When we try to deviate from some policies, like for example, as was mentioned, the deviation from the ironclad legal commitments that we had given to Chinese investors, we had to be pulled back because the penalties for breaking those, for deviating from those policies were enormous. Now in countries like India, where they have a strong administrative structure, the civil service did not get its back broken like ours did in the 1960s and the 70s, including in the 1972 constitution, which was in my opinion a very bad constitution, right? It broke the back of our administrative service. Where they have strong administrative structures, they tend to have real policies, policy documents. We don't have people who can actually draft policies left in government. So we tend to kind of muddle through, but muddling through has got us quite far.
Do you see a mismatch between the main two political parties, the UNP and the SLFP, ideological differences with regard to
really
how
aren't
the economy is being governed? Because the UNP is pro market policies and the SLFP tends to be a bit more protectionist in their policies. Do you see these two ideologies clashing?
I would say that if you really go into the UNP's policies, they are not very market friendly. They have not been for the last so many years. You take some of the regressive taxes, the retroactive taxes that they imposed on selected companies, the kind of arbitrary tax regimes that they have come up with. That's not private sector friendly, that's driving the private sector crazy. And if you look at the SLFP, I mean, most of these, they really, I would say that we have come to a kind of an ideological muddle, where everybody is kind of flailing around in the middle, and they don't really have any strong ideological underpinnings to what they do.
Dr. Mahanameva, a quick question to you. Now, a popular belief is that after receiving independence, Sri Lanka has had its sovereignty with regard to governance. But a belief now that is being shared even on Facebook, if you take a look, is that the British and when the country was being ruled, they were here. But now countries like the United States of America, countries like India, countries like China are in fact still governing us from where they are rather than being here. Is this the case in our country now? Are we still being governed by other countries?
I think the main issue here, we don't have economic freedom. Even we pretend to say we have civil and political independence, but the issue, because of this economic situation, that's why the countries can immediately enter to Sri Lanka soil. Not only that, earlier there were human rights issues also. Now why other nations internationally, they try to force into this country? There are two issues. One side, they come up with human right violation after LTT was defeated by war. Tamil Elam diaspora is very powerful. They were highly pressurizing when Hillary Clinton campaign, as well as we have seen how they passed resolutions in Geneva against Sri Lanka. So that is one way they pressurize. But when the new president came, Donald Trump, but the situation is a little bit relaxed. But now what our government agents are doing, they go behind and try to even withdraw that resolution. Rather than we had 2 years, what we have done. Now, for example, 2000.
But the United States has a bipartisan policy, Dr. Mahanameva. It just doesn't change just because a president changes in a particular country in question.
That's what I'm telling. Still the resolution is there. This month, 24th February, they are coming up with that. I mean, what the government should do, set up a fixed system rather than begging others. That's why my argument, that's why the other countries can post into Sri Lanka. And the other one is economic freedom. Now, see Sri Lanka, the debt. Even a citizen of Sri Lanka, how much is debt for other countries? So it is very easy. Now the new custom law going to introduce, it's a carbon copy of IMF. So what we are going to do now?
Begging others, Professor Sirivira, is that happening right now? As Dr. Mahanameva says, the government is going with the begging bowl to the West?
Well, all developing countries after independence have been going with begging bowls, if you call it begging. But the former colonial countries were underdeveloped due to colonial exploitation. So once they became independent, they had to get assistance from developed countries. So sarcastically one might call it begging bowl, but we cannot live in isolation.
So it's not begging. What is it called then?
The interdependence, I would call interdependence, but the advanced countries do not consider interdependence as such. Grudging concessions, which they give grudging concessions with strings attached to. So loans, investments, without all that no country can survive.
But things did change, things did improve following the 8th of January 2015, right, Professor? As far as international relations are concerned, the government got close to the West, got close to China, got close to Russia again. May not be the right footing at the start, but it got close after a period of time.
In fact, the change of 8 January 2015 brought in a balance, not immediately. Immediately, in fact, because of the alliance with the West, there was a shifting away from China, but then they later realized that it was a fault, and the government went on a course correction path.
Dr. Vijayawardena, a quick question to you again. Now, we saw even in the past, people are speaking of how implementation is important in our country. The President has said that this year, 2017, as Professor Samarji also mentioned, the year to alleviate poverty in our country. Lots of people are going on about it and talking about alleviating poverty in our country, but we don't as of yet see a clear mechanism of how to do this. Maybe it's one could say that it's only 2 months and there is 10 more months to go, but 11 more months to go. But is this the right way? Don't we have to have a mechanism and then, maybe step into how things are done?
Well, of course, the mechanism as well as the announcement will have to go together, hand in hand, because it has already been announced that we have to eradicate poverty, but at the same time we must have a proper mechanism to eradicate poverty, because there are lots of models that we can follow, because we can actually target the poorest of the poor and take them through a possible course of entrepreneurship and allow them to cross the poverty line. So this involves money, time, and also lots of human resources. So that kind of field level mechanism has not been established in Sri Lanka, even though we have the Samudri movement and the Divinagama movement. The mechanism is defective. So what I see is that the government can eradicate poverty from a macro point of view. If you allow the economy to grow at a faster rate, then they will say that there is this percolation effect where the benefits will percolate down to the poor people and they will be able to cross the poverty line. Apart from that, to capture the people who are dropped out of the market, there is no mechanisms in this country so far.
So you mean to say that 11 years will go in vain? Nothing would happen?
I mean, what has happened is now you introduced the Samudri movement. Even before Samudri, we had the Janasavya introduced in 1989. And because of the wrong targeting, wrong mechanism that they have used, politicization of the entire movement, the result had been dismal, because the Census and Statistics Department it conducted a survey a few years back, and they found that about 66% of the people who are receiving these Samudri benefits don't deserve to receive them. So that means we have not properly targeted it.
Professor, can I go? Yeah, Professor Sirivira, we see a growing opposition to this balancing act between China and India. Now, earlier to Shame's question, you said after the 8th of January, you see a balance in foreign relations. But now we see a growing tendency where people are opposing this appeasement, offering India a large project in Trincomalee to compensate for what has been offered to China. Of course, the government has other, intentions of development projects. How do you see this trend? What is your assessment of this trend?
In fact, an American defense analyst at the Gold Dialogue 2 weeks back said that India and China will be the key players in the next decade in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ring. So, Sri Lanka has to face that reality, but Sri Lanka has to balance India, China, USA posture. And given particular areas for development or particular zones for a particular country, China or United States of America or India, is not a good thing. Sri Lanka should be open to every nation, not for manipulation, for strategic purposes. We must clearly understand that now China is very concerned about this belt, the maritime Silk Route, which will be a reality in time to come. So we must, Sri Lanka's foreign policy should be steered in a way that we strike a balance, not giving particular zones, Hambantota zone to a particular country, Trincomalee to a particular country, Colombo Port, particular section to a particular, no. We must strike a balance. Sri Lanka should be open to investment, but not for strategic maneuvering. We must carefully, our foreign policy makers, diplomats, politicians must be very careful about that.
Dr. Vijay, yes, Professor.
Yeah, I think this is an example of the old thinking. Now we have given a part of our Colombo port to a Chinese company, China Merchant Holdings, Port Holdings, as a result of which our overall output, throughput of our Colombo port has been growing because of the Chinese investment. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with doing that in Hambantota? We have to get into public-private partnerships. We have to bring private investment in. The Chinese are pushing investment out of their country. This is an opportunity. It's not a problem. It's an opportunity.
Professor,
we should welcome their investment.
You spoke of a very important matter. You speak about the China Merchants Port Holding controlling 85% of the Colombo International Container Terminals. No one speaks anything about it.
Absolutely.
No
what's the problem?
However,
we are giving only 80% in Hambantota.
However, the present regime is trying to give away the Hambantota port to the Chinese, give away 15,000 acres of land to the as a free trade zone. How everything goes wrong. They're spilling milk all over. Why? Why can't they get a simple thing done? If the previous regime did it, why not this government?
I think
why
you know
can't
the
they do
answer.
it? Why?
I think you know the answer.
What is the answer?
That today, people who were scared to protest those days, everybody is willing to protest. Everybody is on the road all the time. Those days, when these things happened, there was not one whimper of opposition to these things. When the people who are talking about the country being given to foreigners, where were they when CICT, the Colombo International Container Terminals transaction was entered into? I spoke about it, I defended it. But what's the issue here? I think we should have Chinese investment. I think we should have Indian investment. I think we should have public-private partnerships. I have nothing against even 100% foreign-owned companies. In my own telecom sector, 100% ownership has done us extraordinary good things.
Dr. Vijayawardena, what is happening? You know, this government is trying to do something what the previous government did, or take forward what the previous government did. I recollect Priyat Bandhu Vikrama, who was the Port Authority chairman, said that the Hambantota port would be given to the Chinese to control. And then there's milk all over. They just can't enjoy that milk. Why? Is that
the reason
because
is
there's no
actually
communication?
there's a problem in marketing and communication, the economic strategies of the government to people, Samir, because if you take this Hambantota port, and many people are against our giving 80% of the stake equity to the Chinese. But what we have to consider is that when we give 80%, the Chinese are taking the risk also up to 80%. And if we have 50-50, that means Sri Lanka will have to take 50% risk and China is going to take only 50% risk. So it is always better for us to get the lesser risk amount and the foreign investor to get the higher risk amount. And if we go by the Hong Kong, which was leased to the British on a 99-year lease by Chinese, you have seen the difference between the mainland China and Hong Kong. The vast difference, and now of course the mainland China is depending on Hong Kong as a feeding for the Chinese industry. So that is why if we develop Hambantota with this 99-year lease, it is just like the China giving Hong Kong to the British some 100 years ago. So it's the same thing. So because the problem for us is, as Rohan said, we don't have the technology with us. We are not planning to develop technology in-house. So we have to get the technology from outside. That's one way to do that.
Dr. Ujjavardhana, during a recent AmCham event, which was a luncheon, the Prime Minister said that if we don't get this $1.2 billion that was supposed to come in February, I'm going to lose my job. And then he said the governor is going to get a heart attack. Will that happen?
Yeah, that is true, because actually he is referring to the chronic external sector situation in Sri Lanka today, because if you look at the total amount of foreign reserves available, the freely available foreign reserves is about $5 billion, whereas the loan repayments alone within the next 12-month period is about 4.7 billion, close to that. So we don't have enough foreign reserves even to maintain the essential import program of the country. So that is why we need foreign reserves somehow, and that is why he said if he doesn't get 1.1 billion as the payment for the concession for the Hambantota harbour from China, Sri Lanka will have to raise that money through an alternative source. So he had to go for a issue of sovereign bonds amount to about $2 billion, which would add more debt to the country. So this is the least costly option available to Sri Lanka. So that is why he said he would lose the job.
Professor Sirivira, this puts you on the spot now. What are your thoughts? You have two gentlemen saying it's fine to go for a public-private partnership. It's okay to give it to the Chinese. They will take control. They will take the risk along with it. And then you are saying, no, that's not the way to go.
No, what I was saying is particular segments of the country given to particular countries for improvement, development is not advisable. That Hambantota should be open not only to Chinese, to everyone. Trincomalee should be open to everyone. Sri Lanka, Colombo should be open to everyone, not segments. So we have to attract foreign investments. We don't have technology to develop certain areas, but still giving particular zones for particular countries, I don't think that's a wise thing.
I'll come back to you in a minute,
Yes.
Dr. Mahana. I have a question for you.
Yes.
If no one wants it, then what?
No.
Let's say only the Chinese are interested and only the Indians are interested and no one else wants to come in.
Strategic sea route, particularly with this intention of improving the Belt Road or the maritime Silk Route, Sri Lanka's strategic importance is increasingly getting important. So in that context, we can't say nobody is interested. Of course, Venezuela or Uruguay may not be interested, but the main actors in the international scene, USA,
giving us
China,
$1.2
India,
billion
they will,
to salvage the country's economy. $1.2 billion to salvage the economy.
Yeah.
The Chinese are giving us $1.2 billion
Yes.
to salvage our economy.
Yes. So
In that context, it's fine.
so fine. Yes, certainly.
It is fine to give away to the Chinese.
What I say is, getting 1.2 billion as economic aid is okay, but giving particular zones exclusively for a particular country is not in the interest of.
Dr. Mahalananga, what are your thoughts? If no one wants it,
Yeah.
why not give it to the
My
Chinese?
argument is this. Prime Minister President went to Germany. Prime Minister President went to Japan. Prime Minister went to Switzerland. And many more countries. And invited, peace there, you can come and invest, a lot of concession given. No response. Only 2 nations responded. That is China as well as India. So the main issue here, whether they trust this national government and also political stability. They all go to Vietnam. Even they have a socialist system. Lot of USA investment in Vietnam because political stability is there. When they analyze whatever happening currently in this country, and the ministers as well as no collective agreement with the cabinet ministers, there is no trust and confidence.
Now, Dr. Mahalananga, you say a very interesting point. You said that China and India are the only countries who are interested in Sri Lanka.
Tell me, those are the 2 countries at the moment.
My question to you now is the fact that
there is no wrong, that's what I'm telling.
is it because the previous regime made Sri Lanka such a debt-ridden country that no one else wants to come and invest in the country?
No.
So
I
what
have
is the
seen
answer?
in 2014 and 2015, all the West, they try to change the regime. They fully supported. Why they supported to change the regime? They also can come and invest or plant or anything here. But what they have realized now, it is not the same way as they thought. That is my argument. So, I mean China or Russia or any other country, I mean any part, not to sell. Now what is happening here? The easiest way to selling certain parts of our land.
It's not selling. It's not selling.
You can interpret. I also can interpret. I also have my freedom. Another person also have the freedom.
Okay, let's
You can
ask
say
for
yes.
Let me
freedom
just
of,
add a few
Professor Ram
clarifications.
Samadjiva.
Now, the Chinese, the issue is, the Chinese are running a terminal in Colombo. That's a fact. Anybody can go and find out whether the Chinese are running only Chinese goods and containers through that. No. 70-80% of what they're running is they're doing business. Whoever who wants to do business in their terminal, they do business with. The Chinese are running industrial zones in Thailand. They have professional industrial zone managers. Singapore has got professional industrial zone managers. I personally have talked to the Singaporeans to see whether they would be interested in running an IT zone in Sri Lanka 10-15 years ago. So if a Chinese company comes in to manage a zone, I don't know, but I would say that looking at the evidence that we have in Thailand, they don't make sure that it's only Chinese companies that can be there. They will be hospitable to other people who want to function in that zone as well. I think we are just creating what we call straw men and beating them up. We are not talking with reality, and I would say the government is to blame because the government doesn't communicate enough, as Dr. Vijayawardena said.
Dr. Vijayawardena, before I move on to a short commercial break, sometimes democracy and freedom doesn't win battles, does it?
No, in fact, it is the democracy and freedom that should win battles, Shamir, because under dictatorship, you might get a temporary economic growth, but that will not be sustainable because no country has been able to sustain its economic growth through an authoritarian regime. It is through the democracy where people have the freedom of thought, freedom of expression, where they will create new things, where they have the innovative skills, innovative abilities, where their property rights are protected by the state. Only those countries have survived in the long run. So we can say that presently in our democratic system there are lots of protests, but let them be there. After some time they will just get evaporated and we will have a real economic development path.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vijayawardena, for your thoughts in the second round. But before I go, one more question from you. You were in the central bank for 37 years. Have you seen dictatorships?
In the central bank?
Not only the central bank, in economic governance as well.
No, I
in
mean,
regime.
what I find is that the dictatorship in the political arena, in the case of economics, of course, we can say dictatorship because if the government is too much concentrating on state sector without allowing the private sector to grow up, then we can say it's an economic dictatorship by the government. That I have seen, I mean, during the period from say 2005 to 2015, during the regime of the previous regime, there was an economic dictatorship in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Jayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjiva, Dr. Mahana Meheva, as well as Professor Sirivida for your thoughts in the first and second round. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we return with more post-independent Sri Lanka since 1948. 10 years from now, we will tell you what will happen next. Stay connected. Stay with Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I focus my attention now to Professor Rohan Samarjiva, founding chair, Learn Asia. Professor Samarjiva, you were the team leader between 2002 to 2004 to the Sri Lankan Ministry of Economic Reform, Science and Technology. You're somewhat part of the government which was in power at that time, the UNP government. You say in your remarks that the present regime is not market friendly. That government lasted only for 2 years. Now this government has been in power for nearly 1.5 years, since August 2017, August 2015, 17th of August. Will this government pull it through?
Well, if the 19th Amendment wasn't in place, the conditions could have existed for what happened in 2003, well, 2004 January. That is, that despite the commitments given, promises made, that if parliamentary majority was there, the government would not be removed or parliament would not be dissolved. The president had the power and the president exercised that power. Now the issue is that power has been removed by the 19th Amendment. The presidents cannot do that until, I think, 4.5 years or whatever into the term. So to that extent, that particular incident cannot happen again.
What changes do you see in the UNP government's vision as far as the economy is concerned compared to what you saw in the year 2002? You were actively a member of the previous regime. And now
I'm a technocrat. I implement policies, right? So we had, I'll speak with a few examples. We had a policy which said we need to create a regulatory agency for all the hard infrastructure sectors. Within 3 months of my coming to this country, we got a very complex piece of legislation through Parliament, that is the Public Utilities Commission law. The 5-year exclusivity that had been given to Sri Lanka Telecom regarding international telecom, which was leading to everybody in the sector suing everybody else. We were tied up in knots. We had a very bad investment environment. We got rid of that and we went for the IPO, and the third time we tried an IPO in December of 2002, it succeeded. The first and second attempts failed. So that is why I think that is a government that knew what it wanted to do. It found the right people, I suppose, to get the job done, and we got the job done. Unfortunately, those conditions don't seem to be operative right now.
they don't have the right people on board, is it?
Well, that's the only conclusion I can come up with, because I look at their performance over 1.5 years. You take all the pretty clean, the petrol sheds that you pull into, that the viewers of this show pull into. That is because of reforms done during that period. We introduced a semblance of competition to the petroleum distribution sector in this country by bringing in Lanka IOC, right? Why you have such cheap telephone calls and cheap data rates is because of the reforms that were done during that period. Reforms are tough, but they need to be done. And when I compare year to year or 15 months to 15 months, I can't see the delivery from this government. That's why I say I see something missing. It may be implementation capability.
Professor Rohan Samarjiva, before I let you go in the third round, I want to recollect one of your positions in the ICT sector in Sri Lanka. You were the founder director of the ICT agency of Sri Lanka between 2003 and 2005. Am I right?
Among others.
Among others.
Director.
Right. You were
Not
one of the
the
directors, one of the directors of the ICT agency in Sri Lanka. You very eloquently put the fact that hard infrastructure was an area that the previous government looked at. Let's talk about the ICT sector. You want to create an $83 million, let me get the numbers right.
83 million.
83 US dollars million East Sri Lanka initiative. You have an ICT manager, his name is Shoban Rainford. He says that vision, leadership, consensus, policies and institution are the driving factors that the government must keep in mind when they are to bring in a new design. Do you see vision? Do you see leadership? Do you see consensus, policies and institutions in this government?
Are you talking about ICT policies
ICT
now
and
or
also,
then?
Yes, both sectors, economy
Then
as
we
well
had
as the ICT.
four thrusts. We had one on infrastructure, we had one called e-government, one on e-society, and for developing ICT businesses. If you really think about it, we have a very large IT-enabled services or BPO industry in this country today. We didn't have one before 2002. We had one company which was doing very small business called HelloCall. But now today what we have HSBC, we have, I can't even go through the names of the companies that are doing the BPO, KPO business, right? The foundations for that were laid then. We had a plan, even though we didn't have official policies, we had a strategy, we had a roadmap, we implemented. Today I have a sense that there's a little bit of drift. I can't figure out what their priorities are.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjiva. I now move my attention to Dr. Pratibha Mahanamaheva. I want to start off with a particular organization that Professor Rohan Samarjiva just mentioned. He said that in the year 2002, that was the only company that was in existence. And now, this company is in the spotlight. Why? Due to a transaction. They say that the former president's son was involved in this particular company and corruption charges. My question to you is very simple. Where is all the money that the previous government took away from the public as claimed by the present regime? The time
I may not
starts
answer
now.
the question, you have to ask for them because I don't have any answer for that. So those who are responsible, you have to get the answer.
You said that I need to ask the people who are responsible for it. Okay, let me rephrase that question to you. Why is justice delayed? Why don't we see action being taken? You are an attorney at law. You were the former commissioner of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission of the country. Someone comes to you and says, my money was robbed. What would you do, Dr. Mahanameva?
That I can answer.
Absolutely,
Because,
and that is why
I should know the facts and figures.
There
if
you
I
go.
know the
I'm
facts and
posing this
figures where I
question
have invested, I can really give the answer.
Okay, so let's say someone comes and tells you, my
Now,
money is robbed. What would you do?
From, we can see 2015, before the regime change, what was the slogan? Bribery, corruption, expenditure, state money, unnecessary expenditure. So therefore a lot of allegations were there. Now the present government, what they said, within shorter period, they will take into basically on them for books and file cases. And Bribery and Corruption Commission, the former Director General resigned. Why? Once again, same way the political pressure came. Even the head of the state, in a meeting, openly said. So do you think they can freely work? Whether the freedom is there? This is the issue. In this government, previous regime also, some of the ministers are there. One minister is there not responding for the Bribery and Corruption Commission. Every day they try to escape. So where is the law and order in this country? So
You say something very interesting. You say
No,
that
no, no.
the former Director General of
Yeah.
of the Bribery Commission resigned.
that's right. Let me talk a little bit, right?
This is pretty
So,
good.
so there are issues like that. So the same pressure is coming. Why? One of the former minister, he was taken to Bribery Corruption Commission and he complained to the authorities. Thereafter all these things happen. So that means the party who is in power, they can whatever misuse anything. Now, those previous regime, if they have done things, immediately they take into books. But black and white letters, if anyone done something wrong, then they will take. So the implementation, law and order, all these commissions are there. But the issue, these are dragging. The main problem here, I think, even previous regime or this regime, implementation is not happening. If that minister is ready to cross to the other side, everything under the carpet. This is simple political scenario I am telling you. So are they genuine? Are they honest? Even the officials are ready. Can you take these cases? Even you can set up a special high court or special commissions. But it is not happening. See, coal. Basically I am telling the coal agreement. What happened? Where the money gone? Now you can answer that question. So there are a lot of issues like that. So we must be independent and see how these past government or the new government, when they come to one issue, you have to immediately see it. And the other thing, delay of justice. That is another issue in the country. People are waiting. Not only misuse of vehicles, enormous money. People say they have unnecessary spend. Now where are the investigation? What happened to the investigations?
You say something very interesting. You say that the Director General of the Bribery Commission resigned from her position. She had the liberty to do so. Let's take a look at the Elections Commission, the former Elections Commissioner, Mr. Dayanand Dissanayake. When elections were being held back to back, he said, please let me go. I don't want to do this anymore. But the former government didn't let him go. They wanted him to stay there. So there was some sort of democracy and freedom in place when this government was appointed and came into power.
Everyone having the liberty, everyone having the freedom. But immediately when you started these type of investigations, indirectly pressure is coming. You can say liberty or freedom. For any commissioner or for any judge, the freedom is there. But if there is high pressure impliedly coming, what is the next stage? What is the next step? Immediately you resign.
Dr. Mahanameva, in your views, you said that whenever someone has something bad or mud on them, they have to just cross over and they are protected. Who introduced this culture to Sri Lanka? This file culture?
Yes, this has been introduced with the open economy system. That's my personal view. With the 1978 constitution, what has happened? Unnecessary competition started. Even you want to be in power. Now today politicians are basically not government, even public servants. Even they are not serving. They are trying to save their. And you see all these car permits. Today all newspapers headlines. Whether they are in ruling party or whether they are in opposition, they want to earn money. So that culture has created with the globalization and the capitalist system. This is where we have to see whether we are selecting the proper parliamentarians. And also the system, whatever the support you need from the opposition, if they are crossing that side, they are supporting. Even from government, deputy minister, if they leave to other side, you can't go and participate in a election rally even. Where is the freedom? Where is the freedom for that person? That
But I thought crossovers were enabled by Sarath Silva's judgment in 2000.
I will give you some views. I'll give you some time, Professor Rohan Samarjee will talk in a bit. I want to quote from a statement that was made by the former president of Sri Lanka. He said in one of the events, I have the files on all those who defected. Let's now move our attention to Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. I want to ask you, Dr. Vijayawardena, leadership, policies, consensus. 1948 to date, 69 years after independence, do we have the leadership? Consensus, they say there is a unity government now in play. Is that working? And vision. Does this government have all these three?
We don't have to go back to 1948, Samir. Just look at, the period from 2015 onwards. What I can say is that the unity government has failed to get itself united, because the economic policy package that had been introduced by Prime Minister is based on an economic principle called the social market economy. And that particular economic principle had not been conveyed to the constituent parties in the government. So as a result, even except the senior members of the government, the rest of the members from the United National Party are unaware of the details of the social market economy. Even some of the things which the Minister of Finance has done recently, we find that is totally against the social market economy, because in the case of the social market economy, the intervention of the government is minimal. The government will allow the private sector to do everything. The government will simply do the facilitation. But the recent circular issued by Central Bank mandating credit allocation among various private sectors, which the Minister of Finance has decided, it's against the social market economy. So what I feel is that there has not been a consensus among the constituent parties as to what kind of economic policy that they should follow, and the leadership has failed to bring that consensus. There has not been a communication among them, because when the ETCA agreement was mooted by the government, some of the members in other political parties in the government, they just oppose it without knowing what it is. Similarly, the Hambantota harbour, there has not been a communication by the government. So if the government wants to move forward, what is necessary is to first educate the government members, so that they will just speak one language without speaking different languages, and as a result they can represent the government as a one force. So this is not happening today. Now there are lots of allegations, lots of criticisms against the Hambantota harbour, but I haven't seen any government minister appearing in a public forum and explaining the matters to the members of the public, because they themselves are not aware of the details. So this is where the government has failed, Samir.
There is one minister who knows about the details, the Minister of International Trade.
Yeah, only one minister, but of course his communication.
Enough, Dr. Jayawardena?
No, I mean, what I have listened to him, but his communication skills are not that up to that level, because you have to communicate with the general public who don't understand the serious technical terms. You must explain it in a simple language to them, the benefit, what you are going to do, and that has to be done continuously, because in any economic policy reform program, most important factor today is that we have to educate the members of the public continuously, because then whenever a criticism is leveled by the opposition parties, immediately it has to be countered by the government party. So this is not happening. Just one minister cannot do it.
Dr. Jayawardena, before I move my attention to Professor Sirivira, Dr. Jayawardena, during an AmCham event last week, Minister Ravi Karunanayake said that we have the right climate for investors to come in and invest in Sri Lanka. They want the private sector to come and invest in the country. The doors are open. The property laws in Sri Lanka have been made based on the requirement of the investors, so on and so forth. Is it so?
No, I mean a minister can announce anything, Samir, but what matters to foreign investors is the perception of the global community about the country. And if you look at all the indices that would rank Sri Lanka, we have been ranked very poor in the ease of doing business index, then the rule of law index, the corruption perception index, competition index, open government index. We have been ranked very low, because whenever a foreign investor, when he gets interested in a country, he doesn't just listen to the ministers. He will look at the various other authorities who had looked at this particular country and who have rated this country. So we have not scored very high in any of those indices, and as a result, even though the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance might give lots of assurances to foreign investors, they are scared of coming to Sri Lanka.
So when Dr. Rajin Salis said that we've slid from bad to worse,
That's
you agree?
correct. I mean, it's correct. I mean, if you look at all the indices relating to Sri Lanka, the ease of doing index, we have slipped down. Corruption perception index, we have slipped down. Recently, the World Justice Project released the rule of law index, we have slipped down. So our scorecard is not that acceptable to the rest of the world.
Just a couple of seconds ago you said that the most dictatorship you've seen in Sri Lanka was between 2005 and 2015, economic dictatorship.
Yeah.
But seems that President Rajapaksa did his job.
No, he didn't do the job. I mean, if he had, I mean, Samir, you have to
And
look
how
at
can we go from bad to worse?
No, I mean, it started sometime in year 2012. When we started, our economy started slowing down. Growth was slowing down from year 2012 and our export sector was not performing well. And in fact, we were driving ourselves towards the crisis which we are facing today gradually from year 2012, and we had not taken any action during that period. So the present government has simply inherited a crisis which had been created by the previous regime.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Jawardar, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Professor W.I. Sirivir, Emeritus Professor of History, University of Peradeniya. Let's go back in time. 1948, Sri Lanka was an independent state. D.S. Ranayaka was the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. Then we have an executive president in the 1970s. What went wrong? Was it the executive presidency that was the problem in Sri Lanka, Professor?
Well,
Was it that constitution in 1977?
well, executive presidency or executive premiership does not matter much. It's the individuals who matter. They have to be statesmen, not politicians. And over the last several decades, I think we have had no statesman. Always political motives have predominated. So this question nowadays and over the last several years, the question of executive presidency has been coming up again and again as the cause of all ills. But whether it is executive presidency or executive premiership, I don't see much of a difference. But the individuals matter. But now we see, even now, as mentioned earlier by Pratibha, we see the leaders of all political parties that come to power trying to protect their cronies. If they are corrupt, if they are on our side, that is okay. So that is the biggest malady. So lack of statesmanship. In fact, this idea of bribery and corruption comes to the fore. Mr. S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike sacked three ministers who were charged with, or who were minor, taking minor bribes. It was the only occasion, I think, that they are, whatever it is, Mr. Bandaranaike, S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike showed statesmanship. Thereafter, so many allegations against various individuals, but if they are, as I said, if you are with us, everything is accepted. If you are on the other side, we will gun you down. So that's very wrong.
Professor Vida,
Yes.
It seems like the executive presidency is like a cancer. Apart from the first executive president and the second executive president who had an untimely demise following an assassination, all the other executive presidents, D.B. Vijayatunga, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, President Mahinda Rajapaksa, President Maithripala Sirisena, they don't want to let it go. Why?
Yeah, that depends on the personality, of course, personality.
No, you expected Mr. D.B. Vijayatunga to let it go. You expected him to call early elections. However, he did not do so either.
No, Mr. Vijayatunga was a very, very decent politician. He didn't want to use his executive powers, in fact. Now even Madam Chandrika Kumar Tunga didn't use her executive powers.
But she wanted to stay on for some time.
Sorry?
Until a Supreme Court ruling was made that she had to go in the year 2005. She wanted to stay up until
there are
2006.
instances. But
But those
question
instances
is,
are quite significant in history, isn't it?
yes, the question is whether the power is concentrated in one individual, whether it is, you call it president or whether you call it prime minister, it's the same. So we have to have a liberal attitude towards a constitution. That's why now all the time the talk of a constitution comes in. Now you mentioned whether you aptly ask whether this will be a reality. But this is what people want, a fair constitution. But the rulers, when they are there, whenever they introduce constitutions, they try to strengthen their role through that constitution, not for the country. So this talk will go on.
Thank you very much, Professor W.S. Rivera, Emeritus Professor of History, University of Peradeniya. I recollect ancestors saying, my great grandparents used to say that the J.R. Jayawardena Constitution cannot only make a man into a woman or a woman into a man. However, there is something else as well for you to know. The executive president of Sri Lanka cannot even change the governor of the central bank. He has to resign. There you go, some thought before we go into the Q&A session. Let's start off from Sonali Vanikabalge. Being silent today. You were active last week in this very seat, and today, why?
Saving the best for last, Jam.
Saving the best for last.
My question is to Professor Samarajiva. The President in his Independence Day message called on all citizens to shed divisive identities based on race, religion and caste. I'd like to juxtapose this with an article that was written recently. It's by Hilmi Ahmed under the topic, "My country is not truly free until all its citizens feel at home." And I'd like to quote just two lines. "The thought of our 69th Independence Day also reminds me of how distant we have grown on ethnic and religious lines, each of us believing we are superior and growing intolerant of the other. The divisions which have been created is a glass wall that has separated us, and it needs to be broken down." In this backdrop, Professor, how do you see our transitional justice mechanisms, the road towards reconciliation, failing? Where have we gone wrong?
Well, I wouldn't conclude that it's failing, because these, if you look back, for example, at other countries, if you look at the United States, which had a very violent civil war. Now, I lived in the United States, and the North-South divisions are still there. People are still talking about Sherman's march to Atlanta and various things like that. That happened 100 years ago, right? So when you unfortunately let these dogs of war, these passions, these enmities run riot, like we did, and we actually, in some of us, I wouldn't say only our leaders, but some of us stalked them for political advantage. So once you take all these horrible things out from under the rocks that they were, they don't easily go back. You see all these things. I mean, there are factual issues about the extent of willpower. Is it that people who were displaced by the LTTE, who ran for their lives from the LTTE, are they coming back to their own villages, trying to reconstruct their lives? or are they cutting into what is preserved or reserved forest? So even these kinds of factual elements, even when a government official who Sinhalese gets in and says this is not illegal what these people are doing, we are not willing to listen. That just shows how much damage has been caused by 30 years of this conflict. And I don't think that we should say that it can be remedied in 1.5 years or 5 years or anything like that. What we have to do is to keep working on it. And I would say there's serious problems. When I go to Jaffna, I see that there's really no employment opportunities for young people there. When you go to the island of Delft, there's only one place where people can work. That is a navy factory for sewing uniforms. There's nothing else to do in Delft. So I think we got a lot of things to do, and I don't think that I'm going to give the entire burden to our leaders. I think we have to play a role. If you take a company like WSO2 led by Sanjeev Veeravarna, you can go there. He has created a separate place for software engineers to work in Jaffna. There are people who are trying. The Trail Lanka, that exercise was an attempt to heal our wounds. I don't think it is reasonable to ask that these things be solved in 1.5 years. Can't be done.
However, the government happens to be the major stakeholder in this process towards ensuring transitional justice, reconciliation, national unity are achieved. How successful has the government been?
Well, it all depends on which day I look at the newspaper. The day that I found that Raviraj, an MP who was killed in town, I distinctly remember that, in a high security area right opposite where my office used to be, that a Sinhala speaking jury had acquitted him, acquitted the people who were charged with killing him. I despaired. It was a day that I despaired. But then the appeal was filed, and even the appeal was thrown out, and I despaired even more. But now they are looking at seeing whether they can reactivate the appeal. So you see, this is a hard road that we are on. And I think, if we can get the people who've been living in India for 20, 30 years in these horrible camps in Mandapam and places, if we can get them to come back, they have started to come back. Mr. Chellanayagham's son, I believe, returned, right? So if we can get some of these things going, I think we'll be making progress. The question we have to ask is, are we making progress? Not whether we won the battle. I would say 20 years from now, we would not have won the battle. It will not be all milk and honey and sweetness and light.
Dr. Vijayawardena, how important is it to engage the Sri Lankans living abroad in ensuring this road towards true reconciliation is reached?
It is very important because the Sri Lankans living abroad have the access to financial resources. What we lack in Sri Lanka today is, even if we have plans or if we have programs, we don't have enough financial resources to implement them. So in that sense, if we can get the Sri Lankan diaspora, not necessarily the Tamil diaspora, the Sri Lankan diaspora, to invest back in Sri Lanka by creating a necessary incentive system in the country, it would actually help what Professor Rohan Samarajee had been telling now, because what matters to us is that we don't get enough investments into the country, and also with investments the technology should come. Now we lack both financial resources and the technology required for us to do new things for the world market, and as a result we have this particular problem. So it is necessary that we have to allow the foreign Sri Lankan diaspora to return to Sri Lanka with their financial resources, knowledge, entrepreneurial skills, management skills and so forth, because we have lost all those things when these people left the country about maybe 40 to 50 years ago.
So Dr. Vijayawardena, our political leaders are busy seducing the West and other superpowers. Are you saying that no energy has been expended on ensuring that our Sri Lankans living overseas have not really been touched.
No, it's not that way, Sonali, because the what matters to us is we have to create the necessary ground conditions conducive for those people to return to Sri Lanka. That is where our political leaders have failed. Otherwise, they will immediately come back to Sri Lanka, and if there's a profitable business opportunity here, and if they can exploit that opportunity without any practical difficulties, and if we have completed all the economic reform programs which we have to do, we are actually creating the ground conditions for them to come back and invest in Sri Lanka. That is where we are lacking, because even after 2 years in power, the present government has failed to introduce any single economic reform in the country. There is no any, because the first economic policy statement delivered by the Prime Minister, he had talked about a large number of economic reforms covering the entire economy. But none of the economic reforms were undertaken. We are yet to begin with the economic reform program, and once we complete the economic reform program, the diaspora will definitely return to Sri Lanka.
Dr. Manave, Mr. Manave, a question to you as well. I want to direct this to Professor Samarjiva as well. Now, in the second round, I believe you said that only 2 countries have been interested in our country, investing in our country. If you sit back and take a look at what you said, we were promised cars from Germany, but we did not get that. We were promised tires from Italy, and we ended up getting it from somewhere else. So, if you take a look, it seems right. Your statement seems correct. But taking all that into consideration, have we as a country, being in a strategically important place geographically, have we lost the demand, and why have we lost it?
We have lost the demand because of this political instability. That is my first point. Now, these countries also, they have economic advisors. Before any person come and invest, they analyze the situation. The one and only country in United Nations members having a good governance and a national government. This national government basically came for 100 days, and now it is going on extending. Even that is extending, whether whatever they have promised, as Dr. Vijayawardena specifically say, the index of bribery and corruption. You always blame the last regime. They were highly corrupted. But now what is happening? What is happening? Any person, before investing, they go through all these things. So that means still, the last 2 years, what happened? Even in the Northern Provincial Council, the Chief Minister and others, are they providing any opportunity of employment for those areas? That's why these private companies are going. Now they have a provincial council, basically. They always demand for whatever other things. Are they looking for their voters? Are they looking to give access for employment even? Forget about the central government. There is a provincial council set up. Now how many days chief minister sitting there? Are they listening to their problems? Not only from Vellavatta to they go to Jaffna and come back. No, you have to live with people, the reconciliation. We always blame one side, but whether there is a pressure from the other side. No. This is where we have to think. Even municipality council or provincial council or chief ministers, they have to think little bit. They have to assess that. Now if you think in, basically I have visited a lot of times in northern province. They need water basically. They need other infrastructure facilities for their farming and other things. They are ready for these things, even in Batiklo and other areas. So these opportunities are not given.
It seems like all politics is taking place. Why am I saying this, Dr. Mahanameheva? Right after the elections in the year 2015, the presidential poll, they used the Mattala airport to store paddy. However, now the Mattala airport is being used because the construction work in the Colombo port is underway. Airport is currently underway. Mattala is being put to good use. So building the Mattala airport is not a white elephant, is it?
Actually, when the new government came to power, they had a picture, whatever the last government had done, nothing for the country. That's why they used this Mattala airport for all these as a warehouse or storage certain things. Now they really understand the situation. Any government, even in future, maybe after this government, whatever the government come into power, must extend whatever they have done, rather than putting it into a different situation and taking that as a benefit. So we basically, once again, my main argument, all these politicians are same. What they want to keep the power. And also now what is happening? Now earlier, even Honorable President said, no, we don't vote. But now the minister is saying, we need once again for you for the next presidential candidate. So what is fair?
Professor Sirivira, one question for you on foreign policy and strategizing. From the theoretical concept of being non-aligned, we have now moved to a constant flirtation with the West, and as well as with the other superpowers like China and India. Given the melodrama that is currently unfolding when it comes to policy decisions of this present government, do you think we have the necessary political will, intelligence and consistency to move towards a good, positive foreign policy for this country?
Yeah, the non-alignment is not relevant now. Although there are 119 members in the movement, the role it played in 60s, 70s is no more. It cannot play. In fact, the non-aligned summit which was scheduled in Venezuela, lot of state leaders didn't go. Indian Prime Minister didn't go. Sri Lankan President didn't go. Center Minister. So non-alignment as far as the present day global context is concerned is little outdated in my personal
Which is
view.
why I said it's a theoretical concept which we are moving away from.
Yeah. So we have to balance, as I said earlier, we have to balance our relations with major powers, India, China, USA, as well as other Western powers. So we should not, now of course the government is, the present government that came to power in January 2015 is trying to strike a balance. Immediately after it came to power, they tried to shun China out, but later, as I mentioned, there was a course correction. But now the present government, in the context of the global economy, developments and so on, I think is moving in the correct path.
Professor, yes, Professor Samarjeeva, I think the last question to you now. When you take a look at everything that has been discussed today, a key point that was raised is that the government lacks communication when it comes to projects and all of these things. The lack of communication within the government has an impact on the ministers and the parliamentarians as well. We see certain ministers, certain powerful ministers of the SLFP and UNP coming forward and making statements like they will come up with a new act to fight corruption. We saw this in October last year. We see other ministers coming forward and saying various things like they were born on that day. So is this lack of communication affecting the government itself, is my question to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems of internal communication. I think, as Dr. Vijayawardena said, there is a lack of knowledge inside. But before I do that, let me just make one correction to something that Shamil said. President Maithripala Sirisena has to be given credit for actually actively reducing the powers of the executive presidency. 19th Amendment, nothing like that has been ever done in Sri Lankan history. He actually took away his powers. And he has been consistent to his election promise, which was that he would modify and reduce and bring accountability to the office of the president to the extent possible without a referendum. That is also mentioned there. So I don't think we can put him in the pot with everybody else who said they will abolish the executive presidency, signed agreements with various political parties and then reneged on them. So I think we need to get that out of the way. Now, even when it comes to things like Hambantota, you know, today one of the issues is when I was growing up, there were 6 electronic media channels in this country, 2 in each language, and there were 3 or 4 newspapers. There was no television. So those days when we said something had been done or something had been reported, we knew more or less that it had been done. Today there is such a plethora of channels. For example, I am sure Dr. Vijayawardena did not hear the very passionate and long speech given by Rajitha Senaratne about Hambantota. Why Hambantota was the right thing and why it was wrong to protest against it and various things. When that big protest was going on, he gave a long speech and he was followed by several other ministers. Now I am not the one to follow media too much, but to some extent there is some communication going on. I am trying to be fair. However, the government created, under the leadership of Mr. Imtiaz Bakir Makar, a government information center which was supposedly the solution to this problem. That was maybe 6 months ago, August maybe. I really haven't seen any difference as a result of that activity. Now see, that's the problem. Now it's really the role of the President and the Prime Minister to articulate the vision of the government. The President makes a lot of speeches, many of them good speeches. You can listen to the Prime Minister's speeches, I read them frequently. You can learn history, you can learn a lot of things. But there's a lack of connection to what is actually going on. Now, if you can't have that problem, then let's have designated ministers who are to engage in the communication activity. Let's even have active communication going on, advertising even, because in these countries that people think have good governance, like Canada, every cabinet paper has to have a communication strategy, and it includes something called advocacy advertising. We are implementing this policy. How do we communicate it to the public? We don't have such procedures in our country. So that's the unfortunate thing. We have the discordant mess of signals coming through, and people just ranting and raving with inadequate information. I mean, all this talk about Hambantota being sold, nobody is selling Hambantota. Hambantota is a public-private partnership, it's a lease. This government has taken a position that they are not selling land. It's the previous government that sold land to Shangri-La. It's the previous government that sold land to Katik or something else, which was then rolled back. Those were irrevocable sales of land.
Professor Samarjiva, you said that you want to make a correction to what I said. I did not in any way refer that President Maithripala Sirisena is trying to hang on. I am referring to a particular statement that the President made after the death, during the funeral of Venerable Sobhitera. He says that, with all my strength, I pledge before the remains of Sobhitera that I will do everything possible to abolish the executive presidency. Now this was after the 19th Amendment of the Constitution was brought forward. My question was very simple. What has he done?
The constitutional process is what's going on. Now I personally have been very involved.
It is still going on. It is still going on.
Let me go back to his own election promises. He promised very specifically to change the electoral system. Very specific promise in the 100-day program, in his own manifesto. He is accountable for that. And I have spent hours and hours working on that project, because I believe that these things require our participation as citizens as well. Now that thing is still moving. The conversations are going on, the discussions are going on, but it seems kind of silly for us to push for a 20th Amendment when there's another process going on to get a new constitution.
But when will all this happen, Professor? When will we see the end of the tunnel in all this?
We saw the 19th Amendment. We saw the Right to Information Act. We saw these things. These are real. We are talking today on the 7th of February. I have already submitted an RTI request. These are real things. They were done. Let's not denigrate everything that has been achieved. As I told you, if not for the 19th Amendment, Today, the Prime Minister and the entire cabinet will be on tenterhooks. When will we be abolished? When will Parliament be dissolved? Because that is the arrangement that we had prior to the 19th Amendment. A president contesting for life, that is no longer possible. Only 2 terms, right? The presidential term is not 6 years, it's only 4 years. Let's give some credit for these things. Then let's talk about, as I will continue to, complain about the shortcomings and what we can do to improve things.
Professor Rohan Samarjee, from this entire 1.5 hours, I only remember one thing that you said. This government is not market friendly.
I said they can't communicate. I said they can't.
A negative.
I said their policies are unclear. They are confused. I said you asked me specifically about ICT sector. I said they don't seem to know what they want to do.
So there are problems persisting in this government.
Of course.
They need to correct it.
Yes.
Including bringing in the new constitution.
And that's what we try to do as independent intellectuals. We try to correct
this. Constitution is also key.
Pardon?
Bringing in a new constitution is also key.
I'm not 100% sure about that. I think we need to be realistic about it. I think that's one approach. But of course, if you can't get a new constitution through, I would like to see the 20th Amendment. That I'm committed to.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts in the first, second, third and fourth round. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we are not soothsayers and certainly not astrologers, but we will tell you where is the country heading in the next few months, next few years, the outlook in 10 years' time. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation, the final round. Professor Rohan Samarjee, founding chair of Learn Asia. All politicians are the same, says the individual, says Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheba, who is on to your left.
I disagree.
In agreement to it?
I absolutely disagree. I think we are the people who elect our politicians. They are a reflection of their voter. And I actually know quite a lot of decent politicians, people who try to do the right thing. They are buffeted by many forces, and including the nastiest and the most difficult to manage, which is us, the people, the voters. We are the ones who ask for all kinds of unreasonable things from them. And I wish they had more backbone to resist our entreaties.
And these very politicians appoint bad people, as you mentioned in the second round. And that is a problem.
It is.
Then how are we going to move forward from that problem?
Well, you know, in every country that has come out of this kind of problem, if you look at Korea, if you look at Ireland, if you look at countries that have made significant progress, Botswana even, right? Because there are countries that have hit 7% growth year after year for about 10 years. That changes a country. That's what we have not been able to achieve. You have either visionary leaders who have been, you know, Lee Kuan Yew and people like that, or you had a strong administrative service, a civil service. Now, to my great sadness, in the interests of serving the people, the left-wing parties of this country basically broke the back of our civil service. I'm not saying it was a perfect civil service, but when I interact with senior people in the Indian government, I see the difference. Those people have much more confidence, they have more education, they have more, they're just better as administrators. You deal with, for example, people in Sri Lanka have some knowledge of the Indian high commissioners and people like that. They are all career civil servants, no political appointees. In our case, it's always political appointees. So that, I think, is our tragedy, that we have broken the back of our administrative service. We need to fix that. Otherwise, the politicians will continue to make these mistakes that they're making now.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjee, founding chair of Learn Asia. I now move my attention to Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheba, former commissioner of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission of the country, as well as attorney at law. Dr. Mahanameheba, there was talk about millions of money being hidden, millions of money being stashed away in accounts in Seychelles, in Dubai, and then there was talk about using this money to gap the budget deficit. Where is this money now? Why haven't we found it yet? One of the election pledges.
Now, I think these are all just statements without any evidence. To win an election, you may come up with all these things. But when you really start the investigation, it is a baseless statement. And also, if the president keeping all this, whatever he say, the pledge, why the cabinet not 30? Maybe a national government. If you say national government, you can expand this jumbo cabinet. But to reduce all these things, if president can keep the pledge, the best thing he must do to come up with 30 members of the cabinet. Therefore, we can believe this is a reality. And the other thing, whatever the government want to sell is not the own slogan. Maybe it for 99 years or 100 years or 120 years, the one and only. Not only me. If you can see the papers and also with the agreements, now RTI is there, but even RTI there, how many exceptions are there? If you are wholehearted for the good governance, what you have to do, this exemption, even come up with an amendment and try to amend those exemptions to give a clear-cut vision, not only one, the cabinet must be there. But other than that, this corruption, this bribery may continue in this country.
There is now talk about a cabinet reshuffle. Do you think it will happen?
It never happened. If a cabinet reshuffle coming, that is the end of the government. So therefore, whatever the advice they have taken, continue this 2 or 3 years and go for another time and try to sell all the property in the country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha Mahalanka, former Commissioner of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission. Professor W.I. Sirivira, Sri Lanka is not going to be sold to other countries. Is it going to be sold to other countries?
Certainly not. Certainly not. I don't think any main political party or any political party, our leaders, are going to sell the country. But the only problem is we have to manage the economy and we have to get foreign assistance. That is the main problem. The selling the country, sold the country, and all those are slogans, political slogans only. And I don't think any sensible, even the weakest politician would want to sell the country. We have to give the credit, at least that credit, to our politicians. I don't think the country will be sold out to any.
So it's all slogans. So all politicians are the same. They only say slogans.
Not only. They sometimes thrive on slogans, particularly when they are in the opposition. But I won't say all politicians make slogans all the time. It's a difficult task. To be a politician, in fact, we have to give that credit also. To be a politician is also a very difficult task. They have to balance so many acts.
Balancing so many acts, being a politician is tough. That's what you say, Professor Sirivira?
Balancing?
Balancing the acts are difficult as far as politicians is concerned.
Very difficult. So we very easy to criticize, very easy to make comments, adverse comments, but governance is a very difficult task. I think in that context, we have to appreciate the difficulties of politicians as well.
We have to appreciate the difficulties of politicians. I thought before I move on to Dr. W. Jayawardena, you know, the US President who is now taking office is making many strides forward. He's concerned about America. He has imposed a ban from 7 Muslim countries that was challenged by the acting Attorney General. She was removed, a new Attorney General was appointed. Mayhem as far as US politics right now is concerned. Who would have ever thought? I don't even think that Mr. Walt Disney would have ever thought that Donald would one day be elected the President of the United States. On a very lighter note, that is, of course. Let's now move on to Dr. W. Jayawardena, the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. I happen to have moderated the session of the AmCham luncheon meeting which was held last week, Dr. Jayawardena. There I was able to ask Mr. R. Lingam as well as Ms. Chartharatwata if they want to see any changes in governance as far as the economy is concerned, what changes do they envisage? And both of them in one voice said, first implementation, second implementation, third implementation. And these are two senior advisors to the Prime Minister's office, who is deemed as the man who is running the country's economy. Implementation. Isn't it not happening?
Samir, before that implementation, there should be two other words. We have to design, we have to plan, and then implement. Because for us to implement, there must be a plan. So without a plan, you can't just think of implementation. But we are defective in making plans, making designs, because as Professor Rohan Samarjeeva has very correctly said, our bureaucracy is not good enough to prepare good plans in Sri Lanka today as it could do maybe 50 years ago. And as a result, the government people also lack the technical assistance which they should get from the technical experts to design plans. So once the plans are made, then only you can think of implementation. But of course, after the plans are made, yes, the key word is implementation, and implementation has to be done faithfully, consistently, without going backward. So these are the main issues that we are facing in Sri Lanka today. And if we can design, and then execute them, then we may be able to come out of the current economic malaise.
Dr. Jayawardena, what is your outlook for the next 10 years?
10 years, of course, now for the next 5 years, I can say our economic growth will be less than 5%. I mean, we can't attain more than that. And it will be a severe blow to Sri Lanka's poverty alleviation program, because the president wants to eradicate poverty, but poverty has to be tackled at two levels. When the economy grows above maybe around 8 to 9% continuously, there will be an automatic reduction in poverty in the country because of the percolation effect. The other poverty alleviation program is, we have to take care of the people who are dropped out of the economic system, and we have to assist them. Now we don't have either. So because of this reason, the next 5-year period till about say 2021, the country is destined to have a low economic growth. And as a result, it will have a serious problem for the next 10-year period, Samir.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Jayawardena, for joining us this evening. Plan, decide, and then you have to implement. First of all, you have to plan, then you have to decide, and then you have to implement. Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjeeva, Founding Chair of Learn Asia, for joining us this evening. Dr. Pratibha Mahanamaheva, former Commissioner of the Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission, also attorney at law. Dr. W. Jayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And also Professor W.Y. Sirivira, Emeritus Professor of History, University of Peradeniya, for joining us this time. I hope you enjoyed the show, Professor.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Chaturanga, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Charita, for joining us this evening. And of course, Sonali Vaniga Baduge, attorney at law, for joining us this evening. You said some interesting word today on the show. Do you recollect the word, Sonali? No? You said flirtatious towards the West. So I want to leave you tonight.
I said everything, and that's the one word you got.
That's the one word I remember, Sonali. So I want to leave you tonight with a quote that was made by Queen Elizabeth, who was ruling England at the time of Sri Lanka's independence in 1948, upon receiving a proposal from the Duke of York. Sonali, she said, "Afraid never, never again to be free to think, speak and act as I feel I really ought to." There you go. This is your time. Act and never fear to talk the truth. Take care. Good night. God bless. Next week, same time, same place. This is Face the Nation.